My name is John Alexander Stedman. I was born in Arlington, New Jersey in 1922. My parents are Gladys Stedman and Clarence Stedman. I have one sister named Gladys. I was educated in the New Jersey public schools, and then I went on to college at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. I volunteered for the Army in 1943. I was sent to Fort Dix, New Jersey for an induction in 1944. After Camp Dix, I was assigned to go to the Army Medical Training Center in Camp Pickett, Virginia, and finished a course there. And then I was sent to Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. to ASTP. Said on the way into when we were going up to from Camp Pickett to Washington, the train was full. So the sergeant in charge of transportation got the postal service there to let us sit in the mail car on the way up to Washington. Well, it was a steam train, and it puffed smoke out. And we went through the tunnel going into Washington. When we got off, we were going to a minstrel show. We were pockets full of sand, dirt. It was terrible. But anyway, that was just one little side issue that happened on the way. Anyway, I went to ASTP, spent about 2 months in Washington, and then I was sent to the University of Vermont in Burlington, Vermont, and took a course in mechanical engineering. When we finished the course at Vermont, we were told to get ready, and we were going to be shipped out. We ended up in Tullahoma, Tennessee, in the Tennessee maneuver area. And I was assigned to the 104th Infantry Regiment of the 26th Division, K Company, of the 4th Battalion. And I stayed with them in Tennessee, and then when we were over the maneuver, we came to Columbia, South Carolina, to Fort Jackson, and did further infantry training there. We left Fort Jackson and were sent by train to Camp Shanks, New York, which was a POE, and went overseas on the steamship Argentina. I happen to have known that several of my father's friends shipped out on that during peacetime. It was a real luxury liner, and they tore it up. I mean, they'd put screws in the wall, you know, and hung on it. But anyway, made it into a troop carrier, and that was quite a trip over. It took us 17 days to go over. We were in convoy, and we lost several ships on the way over. They usually put the tankers on the outer edge, and they got the first blow. But we got there safely after 17 days. Now, on the way over, my company, just by accident, we happened to be charged with being the armed guard on the ship. This was a control unit. And I stood guard on the open bridge for 4 on 4 off for the whole trip with ammunition. I mean, the troops could not move from one end of the ship to the other. They were all assigned. We had a red area, a green area, a blue area, a brown, and so on. If you're in the red area, you couldn't move out of the red area, see, and that was what we were supposed to control. Now, we landed at Cherbourg, France. I'm guessing sometimes in late August. That sounds about right. I'm not sure. Just about the time the Germans were not getting on too well, they were moving back. Interesting story, when I was in Cherbourg, one of the first person I saw when I was getting off the boat was an old college friend of mine, and he had attained the rank of captain. He was in the Army Navy intelligence thing, and he was stationed in Cherbourg. So he said, I'll be out and see you, and I know where you're going to bivouac. So the next few days, he came on out, and here I was a private. And Captain Pyle came up and wanted to see me. Well, he saw my company commander, and he said, the captain said, I'd like to take my friend John in and spend a few days with me in Shore. Oh, we couldn't do that, couldn't do it. He says, you know, Captain said, I happen to have access to some real fine French wine that the Germans stored up while they were taking over France. He said, I might be able to find a few bottles to send back with me. He just let them go. So I went to spend 3 days in there and had a good time. When that was over, we went on to the front with General Patton in the Third Army. Now, I was a scout and a sniper. And I carried an .03 and a telescope and tracer ammunition. So you know I had a real good time. That's a very good rifle. And we went into action just past St. Lo. They were still smoking when we went through there. I had my first scouting event a few days after that. We had set up a perimeter line on a mound, a hill, and we could see the Germans moving. They could see us too. But I went out on a scouting party to see what was going on. When I came back, the company commander said to me, well, you boys done a good job. Says, go on back to regimental headquarters and spend a day or two and rest up. So I went on back there, and we were laying in some bales of hay in an old farm, and there's some chickens in there. So smart fellows that we were, we got them up in the corner and caught 3 or 4 of them and killed them. About that time, we got called back to the front. So we went on back, carrying the chicken. We also found some grease in the kitchen. We got back on there. We didn't have a frying pan. We did have remember the little gasoline stoves? Well, we had a little gasoline stove, and so I took my helmet off and wiped it out and put the grease in, cooked the chicken in the thing. I mean, that's the truth. It was a lot of fun. Anyway, we were real good. And about the same time we did that, this shows you the things that happened in the Army. We were taking some fire. And one day, things were sort of a nice day. You know, the sun was out and it wasn't raining. And they started shelling. Well, this fella jumped into the foxhole that he had dug. But in doing, he hit his nose on a piece of wood he'd put across to hang the shelter half, you know, you to cover yourself up. Well, first thing he did, when the shooting was over, he went on back to the aid station there, and the captain said, what happened to you? He says, when they were firing over, I was getting him. He says, his clerk, see that this man gets the Purple Hearts. I've cut my nails and draw more blood than that, but he was going to get the Purple. Everybody had an award. We moved on across through France. We were south of Paris. I can't tell you all the places that we were, but that was part of it. And we'd been up on the front for 3 or 4 days and had some enemy action, and we came back for a rest area. And by that time, things were moving along pretty fast, and the rest area had a Salvation Army unit there that had coffee and donuts, and they gave us all you remember the knitted head things, you know, that covered you up? We got those. But the funny thing about those, the officers got their liquor ration up there. And they were all we were much better friends than we were before, see? So they shared the liquor ration with us. And they said, all right, we're going to give you a bottle to each 2 of you. So they gave my buddy and I, Paul Tebow, they gave us a bottle of blackberry cordial. God, it was awful. But we drank most of it. Before we got done, though, they called us, you got to go back, you got to go back. So anyway, we went back. But before we got away, the Red Cross or the Salvation Army, they had a movie of Bing Crosby Going My Way. And they had a big old barn there, and they fixed up so we could see it. We saw Going My Way right up on the front in a big barn. Now, then there's a lapse in here. I mean, we're just day-by-day things. But one day they sent me out on a maneuver or on a certain area to see what was going on. And I was walking up through the mud. There's always mud in France. I mean, it sticks to your feet, too. But I noticed over on my right, I noticed some motion. So when I got up where I could sort of see around the corner like that, I looked over and there was a whole platoon of Italian mountain troops in their, beautiful high socks and beautiful uniforms and that. When they, what they did when they saw me, they threw their hands up. So I took all 30, about 30 of them, took all 30 of them back. And they were glad to be captured. Not too long after that, we came upon, as there are many in France, a small walled town, mostly stone. But it was as I recall, it was almost a perfect square. And a road went from one side to the other side, and right in the middle was a cross. And that was the town. Well, old John went down, and I crossed a little stream and walked on in and went through that gate, and there was nobody there. So I told the troops, come on in, so we went in. We spent the night there. But I wasn't so sure about finding a place to sleep, so we had a basement or what looked like about the city hall. I threw a hand grenade down in there and nothing happened, so I went down. I slept on the floor down there on the wood, but I took my shoes off. It was an absolute mistake because I couldn't get them back on the next day. So when I got up the next morning, I finally struggled and I got my feet back into those things. I never would have been captured if I'd stayed there. We went on and we encountered very heavy fire between Metz and Nancy near Saarbrücken. And we were completely outnumbered. I mean, we were not only outnumbered, we didn't have the ammo, we didn't have the firepower. We had, the Germans had Tiger tanks and machine guns, and we had rifles and 60-millimeter mortars, and there's just no way you can win on that. And I don't really know the whole story because I was captured at that point. And from then on, I didn't know much. But in later days, somebody told me that most of that outfit I was with was wiped out. I'm just one of the lucky ones. And I remember just after we got captured, we hadn't had anything to eat in 4 or 5 days. I mean, there just wasn't any communication or way to get things.
How many were captured with you?
To the best of my knowledge, I only know about 8 of us that were right up on the front. I'm sure there must have been more. But my buddy and I, neither one of us was wounded. But the 2 men, Dick and somebody else, they both died. They were firing these aerial bursts. They were hitting above us. And my old .03 rifle, I had run out of ammunition. And so I'd put the bayonet on it and stuck it in the ground so it wouldn't get water in it. And boy, one of those shot and didn't have a bit of wood on it left. It was all gone. I didn't tell them. When it was done, it was done. I didn't ask to have it either.
Right.
I made a very bad mistake. Up here at Fort Jackson, I had the highest score in the regiment. I shot 204 out of 206, and they said, "You're now our sniper." Yeah. We were captured, and they marched us from where we were captured to 2 little towns, and they're right close by, with Morslingen and Forbach. And Forbach had a railhead. And so when we got there at Forbach, they put us in 40 and 8s. But they didn't put 40 in there, they put about 70 in there. We couldn't even hardly stand up in the damn things. And we stayed in there. I don't know, time it's hard to decide, but we stayed in there a number of days with no food, no water, no nothing. And finally we got to Limburg, and that's where we started getting taken care of a little better. When we were first captured and we were just sort of waiting around for things to settle down, I speak fairly fluent German, or did. And I said to one of the corporals there on the tank battalion, that ich bin hungrig. It means I am hungry. And he gave me an apple. And now going through more back on the way to the train, the civilians threw rocks at us and sticks. They were very upset. And much to their credit, the German troops went and chastised them. They pushed them back, and they were angry about it. The German soldiers were not sadistic. They were good soldiers. When I got to Limburg, I say they took away our uniforms and issued us some clothes that were, I think, the Armenian army lost in the War of 1702, because I had a pair of pants that didn't reach but halfway down my knees, and the coat, the arm didn't come but about this far down on here, see? And I had no socks and no shoes. Do you know what a Fußrappen is? A Fußrappen is a piece of cloth about the size of a handkerchief. You put your foot down on it, and you bend it this way and this way and this way, and then put it in your shoes. That's socks. The shoes were not leather. They were wooden bottoms with leather toes and leather heels. And I had those the whole time I was in prison. And our clothes, we think, were probably used in the Battle of the Bulge, because they took coats, pants, jackets, hats, helmets, everything. Then they put us back on a train, and we went up to New Brandenburg. And with there, we were distributed out in parcels to these various places. And I ended up on an airport at Puchheim. It's a small town about 60 miles south of Lübeck. And there was 100 of us, roughly 100 of us. Many I didn't know. There was no units were not kept yet. But fortunately, my buddy Paul Tebow and I stayed together the whole time. And maybe it was just a feeling, but you never were quite sure about anybody. You don't know who was saying what, so you have to stay with whom you knew. Now at Puchheim, things got down to regularity. When I say that, we had a place to lie down every night, filthy dirty. We had no covers, we had no heat. It was just, there were wooden things with straw in them, and that's where we slept. And we had no heat in the place. We did have one electric light. I think it was about that big in the middle of the room, and the latrine was terrible. I mean, it was just, in fact, I would say if you had a picture of what those poor devils in the Holocaust were going through in them, we looked pretty much like them. In the whole 7.5 months that I was a prisoner, other than the shower I took in there, I never had a bath, I never shaved, I never had a haircut, I never had a toothbrush, never had a haircut, never anything like that, and never took the same clothes off my back. We were on an airport, and the Americans bombed the airport, and then they made it go, we filled the holes up. And then they'd bomb it again, and we'd go fill them back again. And then one time it snowed, and we shoveled the whole doggone airport by hand and loaded the snow into wagons, and they hauled them off. I mean, it was just hard. And then the worst labor that we had, well, they had 2 or 3 big hangars there, and they were full of cement. And they were, I'm not sure what the weight was, but I mean, all of us by that time were down to hunger state. And we carried those things out and loaded them on things. And incidentally, I am totally disabled. I mean, the Army recognizes it, and I'm paid accordingly. So, and that was from that loading that stuff on my shoulder, and it just crushed my vertebra. And I got back trouble, and both my knees have been replaced. So I'm sort of incapacitated. But anyway, that was what we did. It was labor. And we unloaded cinders from the barges on the canal to build road. We built roads. In the morning, we had something they called coffee. It looked more like they'd boiled some sumac leaves or something like that. I mean, it was hot. That's all I can say. Then at noon, we got a bowl of soup. And most of it was cut up turnips. I found a piece of meat one time. I wasn't exactly sure what it was. And sometimes there were carrots and sometimes potatoes, but not too often. But in deference to the situation, they didn't have much either. The war was winding down, and they didn't have much. And at night muster, when we mustered every night, we would line up and they would count out 6 people, and they'd give you 1 loaf of brown bread, and you had to divide it with 6 people. And that was all our food. While I was there, we got 2 Red Cross boxes, and they had taken the cigarettes and the chocolate and maybe some other things out. I probably weighed 175 pounds when I was captured. I probably weighed 100 pounds after that, in the end. I had one fellow I made friends with, his name was Willie something, I can't think of it now. But I kept up with him, he spoke enough English and I spoke enough German, we could converse. So it was very, very nice to have. And he wasn't bitter. I mean, he wasn't one of the one you had to watch out for was the Waffen and the Waffen SS. They're the ones. Boy, they were mean. And we, when we were out shoveling snow, and like I told you, my pants leg didn't come down all the way. If you weren't working hard enough, they had a switch, and they'd switch you on those cold legs, and you'd know it. And but the guards we had, well, the corporal was sort of he was in charge of this group, guarding us. He was sort of ugly, but the rest of them were pretty decent people. And the one, Willie Pfeiffer was the one that I knew, and Willie had been wounded on the Eastern Front, and he was back doing guard duty now. He came to me the day that the armistice was declared. He came to me and I said, "Willie, where are you going?" He said, "I don't know," but he says, "For us, the war is over." And I said, "Well, what are you going to do?" He said, "I'm going to try and make it to Denmark." I never heard any more from him. He, nice fellow. I mean, he really was. I could have been a friend of his. Now, I came back to the U.S. in June of 1945. I went from where we were at Puchheim. The British 8th Army sent some trucks up, and they took us back to Schwerin, S-C-H-W-E-R-I-N. And we spent the night in some thing lying on the floor. Then they took us down to Hildesheim, which is, there's an airport at Hildesheim. And we stayed there a couple of days, and then they flew us to somewhere in France. We flew us to Reims. And then at Reims, we stayed a couple of days, and then we flew us to, is it Chartres, C-H-A-R-T-E-S, France? Yeah. Okay, they flew us to Chartres, and then to the POW, what was it, where all the ships land there. Camp Lucky Strike. Le Havre. I was in Camp in Le Havre. Yeah. I was in Camp Lucky Strike. And oddly enough, you know, it's amazing to me that life starts so much and all of a sudden the war is over and things are starting to do. So I was walking down the street in Chartres and they had a carnival going, a street carnival, you know, traveling thing. And I heard all this music and I went to look. And who was over there? This fellow, he says, "John, what in the world are you doing here?" It was a fellow I'd gone to high school with. Isn't that something? There was a bakery, and the bakery was operating, see? And people were driving along with bicycles, and there was a cheese factory there. So I went down, Paul and I went down there, and we bought us some cheese and a loaf of French bread, you know, about that long. And we were having a good time. We saw these people coming out of the thing, and they'd have a loaf of bread and would only be wrapped right in the middle. And I said, "What in the world are they wrapping it like that for?" I found out. When they were riding a bicycle, they'd stick it under their arm. and so So anyway, we ate our bread and cheese there and thought it was just wonderful. It was a thing. And then, well, anyway, I came back to this country and I got a furlough. I stayed home a month with my parents. And then I went back to duty, and they sent me, I went to Asheville, North Carolina. And I spent about 2 months there in rehabilitation and questioning. And then they shipped me out to Fort Riley, Kansas. For what reason, I'll never know. I didn't strike a lick at a snake the whole time I was out there. But finally they said, you're going to be discharged. And they sent me to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And on December the 23rd of 45, I was discharged. And that was the end of my military. I ended home in New Jersey with my parents in December of 1945. And then because I'd been gone for so long, I stayed home with my mother and dad for 6 months. Then in June of 46, I went back to college and finished. And I graduated in 1947. I was very disheartened with being with a company like that. And I don't say the National Guards are all alike, but they were not trained. And they took us, I mean, when we joined up as replacements, we were treated like country cousins. In fact, when we were at Fort Jackson up here, when we finally got our bivouac area in Tennessee, when we came back, there were about 12 of us who had been together through thick and thin, and had come together from up there at Vermont. And when they got there, we lined up outside, and the 11 or 12 of us were set aside, and the rest of them would go in and eat first. I mean, we were not of the brethren. And I found that they were not trained. And I always feared for my being because we were dealing with untrained people. I hope I don't cast too bad a shadow on them, and I certainly wouldn't want to. They're all gone now, I'm sure. But they were not proficient, in my opinion. After I came back from service, see, and went to college, I met my wife in Chapel Hill. We were married in 48, and we went, and I went to work with DuPont. I worked for them. And so we moved to Parkersburg, West Virginia, the garden spot of somewhere, I don't know, but it's not really a gung-ho town. But anyway, we went out there, and we enjoyed our married life there. And in the meantime, her father, who lived here in Marion, South Carolina, owned the Ford agency there. They had no children, no sons to take over. And so he came up there and he propositioned me, and he gave me a partnership in the company. And we moved to Marion. And we've been in Marion since 1950. I had the 4 children and got 7 grandchildren.